Hello and welcome. Find a quiet space, a comfortable chair. Perhaps pour yourself a drink. Tonight we are going on a hike. We are venturing into the vast, majestic, and breathtakingly beautiful wilderness of America's national parks. These are the crown jewels of the nation, a concept that America gave to the world. Places like Yosemite, with its granite sentinels scraping the sky, Yellowstone, with its geothermal heartbeat pulsing beneath the earth, the Great Smoky Mountains, with their ancient, rolling hills veiled in an ethereal blue haze. They are sanctuaries of stone and timber, of rushing rivers and silent, ancient peaks. They are the places we go to escape the noise of our lives, to feel the firm earth beneath our feet, to breathe air that tastes clean and wild. We go there to reconnect with something primal within ourselves, to feel small and humbled in the face of something immense and timeless. They are, for millions of people every year, a source of peace, adventure, and profound, soul-stirring beauty. But the wilderness has always been a place of duality. For all its life-affirming beauty, there is a deep, ancient, and unforgiving power that resides there. It is a power that operates on a timescale we can barely comprehend, a power that is utterly indifferent to our presence, our plans, our survival. And with that power comes a primal, understandable fear, the fear of getting lost. We've all felt a flicker of it, that fleeting moment when you look up from the trail and realize all the trees look the same. A brief, cold spike of adrenaline that shoots through your chest before you find your bearings, consult your map, and continue confidently on your way. Most of the time, that's all it is. A flicker, a momentary lapse in an otherwise wonderful day. But for some, the flicker becomes a fire, and the wilderness, in an instant, swallows them whole. Every year, thousands of people go missing in our national parks and federal lands. The vast majority of these cases are tragic, but understandable. An unprepared hiker gets caught in a sudden storm. A tourist wanders off a marked trail and takes a bad fall. An elderly person with dementia becomes disoriented and wanders away from a campsite. The search and rescue teams, the brave and dedicated men and women who risk their own lives in these environments, usually find them, or at least find a clear explanation of what went wrong. But this story isn't about those cases. Tonight, we are delving into a strange and unnerving subset of disappearances. A collection of cases so bizarre, so confounding, and so eerily similar that they defy all conventional explanation. We are exploring the phenomenon that has become known as Missing 411. This term was coined by a man named David Paulides, a figure as intriguing and controversial as the mystery he uncovered. Paulides is not a paranormal investigator or a conspiracy theorist. He is a man of facts and procedure. He spent 20 years as a police officer in the San Jose Police Department, working everything from street patrol to SWAT, eventually becoming a detective specializing in crimes of deception. When he retired, he had no intention of starting a second career. But then, a park ranger, aware of his investigative background, approached him at a national park. The ranger told him, off the record, that he and some of his colleagues were deeply disturbed by the number of people who vanished from the parks under baffling circumstances, and that they felt the National Park Service wasn't being entirely transparent about the true nature of the problem. Intrigued, Paulides began to dig. As a retired cop, he knew how to navigate bureaucracy. He started using the Freedom of Information Act to obtain case files, reports, and data that were often difficult, if not impossible, for the public to access. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He was just a detective following a lead. He spent years sifting through thousands of cases of people who had disappeared on federal land. And as he organized the data, he began to see something that chilled him to the bone. This was not just a collection of random, unfortunate events. He found a pattern, a deeply unsettling profile of disappearances that shared a cluster of specific high strangeness factors. These were not just people getting lost. These were people vanishing under circumstances that made experienced search and rescue professionals, seasoned law enforcement officers, and even FBI agents scratch their heads in utter disbelief and, in some cases, outright fear. So before we step onto the trail of our first case, let's understand the map. Let's lay out the specific, recurring profile points that David Paulides identified. These are the strange threads that tie these disparate cases together across decades and across the entire continent. First, the victims often vanish in or near specific geographical clusters. Paulides has identified dozens of these clusters across North America, with Yosemite National Park being one of the most prominent. Second, the disappearances are frequently preceded or immediately followed by a sudden, dramatic, and often unseasonable turn in the weather. A calm, sunny day will inexplicably give way to a torrential downpour, a whiteout blizzard, or a dense fog, severely hampering search efforts as if by design. Third, and this is one of the most critical points, highly trained search and rescue dogs are consistently baffled. In case after case, multiple dog teams, sometimes from different agencies, will follow a scent trail for a short distance, and then it will just stop cold. Not fade out, but terminate abruptly, as if the person was lifted off the ground. Fourth, when the victims are found, the location is often bewildering. They are discovered in places that seem physically impossible for them to have reached, sometimes miles away and thousands of feet up in elevation, across impassable terrain like rivers or canyons. Often, these locations have already been thoroughly searched multiple times. Fifth, the victims, especially children, are often found missing their shoes and sometimes other articles of clothing. This occurs even in freezing conditions, a detail that defies the simple explanation of paradoxical undressing. Sixth, many disappearances occur in close proximity to water sources, like creeks and rivers, and also near berry bushes or granite boulder fields. The significance of these features is unknown, but the correlation is statistically significant. And finally, for the very few who have survived and been found, their stories are often fragmented, marked by missing time, and filled with bizarre, sometimes terrifying details that they themselves cannot explain. This is the chilling checklist of the missing 411 enigma. And tonight, we will walk the trails of these mysteries, examining the cases that exemplify these strange patterns. These are the true stories of people who walked into the sublime beauty of our national parks and simply stepped out of our reality. So join me as we follow the trail into the dark heart of this American mystery. To truly understand the chilling, gut-wrenching nature of the missing 411 phenomenon, we have to start where the mystery is at its most potent and its most heartbreaking: the disappearance of small children. A child vanishing is every parent's worst nightmare. But in these cases, the nightmare is compounded by a total, infuriating breakdown of logic and physics. Our first case is perhaps the most famous, the one that, for many search and rescue professionals, defines the entire mystery. This is the story of Dennis Martin. It was Father's Day weekend, June of 1969, in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The Martin family, William, Dennis's father, his wife, and their two sons, Dennis and his older brother Douglas, were on their annual camping trip, a family tradition they cherished. They were in a popular, well-traveled area called Spence Field, a large grassy meadow high on the Appalachian Trail, known for its stunning panoramic views. The Martins were not alone. Several other families were also camping in the area. It was a place of community, of shared appreciation for the outdoors. 6-year-old Dennis was a bright, energetic, and completely normal kid. He was wearing a red shirt and was known for his love of the outdoors. That afternoon, the Martin children were planning a friendly prank on the adults. The plan was simple: Dennis, his brother Douglas, and a couple of other kids from a neighboring campsite would split up, hide in the bushes on opposite sides of the clearing, and then jump out to surprise their parents. A classic, harmless game of hide and seek. The boys scattered. Dennis went one way into a patch of rhododendron bushes. His brother went the opposite direction. A few minutes passed. Suddenly, Dennis's father and grandfather heard a scream from the direction Douglas had gone. Thinking he was hurt, they ran to find him. It turned out to be nothing, just the boys getting overexcited in their game. The family had a laugh, but when they turned their attention back to where Dennis had gone, he wasn't there. He didn't jump out. He didn't make a sound. He was gone. He had vanished from a wide-open field, surrounded by his family, in broad daylight, in the space of just 5 minutes. The family immediately began to call his name. At first, they thought he was just very good at hiding. But the minutes stretched on, and a cold tendril of fear began to creep in. They searched the nearby woods, the bushes where he was last seen. Nothing. The panic became real, and they alerted the National Park Service. What followed was one of the largest and most intensive search and rescue operations in the history of the park. Over 1,400 people would eventually join the search, a massive force that included the National Guard, local volunteers, and even a contingent of elite Green Berets from Fort Bragg, brought in for their expert tracking and survival skills. The park was swarming with the best of the best. But from the very beginning, the case was plagued by an almost malevolent high strangeness. The first clue came from another family, the Key family, who had been hiking on a different trail about 5 to 6 miles away from Spence Field. Later that same afternoon, they reported hearing an enormous, sickening scream that seemed to tear through the forest. It was so unsettling that it made them stop in their tracks. A few minutes after the scream, they saw something moving in the woods. Mr. Key, the father, initially thought it was a bear, but as it moved through the brush, he got a clearer look. He described it as a large, dark, rough-looking man, seemingly carrying something small and still, flung over its shoulder. At the time, they didn't know a child was missing, so they didn't think to report it until they heard the news later. The description of a large, hairy bear man would echo another common element in many of these cases: the proximity to cryptid or Bigfoot sightings. The FBI, taking the report seriously, even brought the Key family back to the location, but no evidence was found. The second strange event was the weather. Just a few hours after Dennis disappeared, a torrential, completely unforecasted downpour hit the area. The rain was so intense that it washed away any potential tracks, erased any scent, and turned the search area into a muddy, treacherous quagmire. This pattern of a sudden, dramatic, and often unseasonable turn in the weather right after a disappearance is a cornerstone of the missing 411 profile. It's as if the environment itself is actively working to cover up the event, to erase the evidence. The search continued for weeks, turning up nothing. The Green Berets, men trained to operate in the densest, most hostile jungles on Earth, were utterly baffled. They reported a strange, oppressive silence in the woods, an unnerving lack of animal life, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. One of the FBI agents on the case, a man named Jim Reich, would later say it was the strangest case he ever worked in his career. He couldn't understand how a 6-year-old boy could vanish so completely, so quickly, without leaving a single trace. No clothing, no footprints, no blood, nothing. The search officially concluded in September, but the mystery never did. Dennis Martin was never seen again. He disappeared from the middle of his family, in a well-trafficked area, and a massive, expert-led search found absolutely nothing. It is the template of impossibility, a case that would be repeated with chilling regularity in the decades to come. If the case of Dennis Martin demonstrates the utter vanishing, the complete erasure of a person from the landscape, our next case illustrates what is perhaps the most mind-bending aspect of the phenomenon. When the missing are found, the location of their discovery often creates more questions than answers. It is a detail that shatters any conventional explanation. This is the story of Jared Atadero. In October of 1999, 3-year-old Jared was on a trip with his father, Alan, his 6-year-old sister, and a group of 12 adults from their church. They were visiting the Big South Trail, a popular and relatively easy trail near the Poudre Canyon in Roosevelt National Forest, Colorado. The group was staying at a Christian-owned fish hatchery for the weekend, a place of peace and fellowship. Jared was a strong, energetic, and adventurous little boy, described as having the physical abilities of a much older child. During a short walk on the trail, which ran alongside the Poudre River, Jared ran ahead with some of the other children. The adults were close behind, enjoying the scenery. He was last seen by the group talking to a couple of fishermen by the river. When his father, Alan, caught up to the spot just a few minutes later, Jared was gone. The fishermen said they had seen him, but that he had wandered off, perhaps up a small hill nearby. They assumed he was with his group. Again, the familiar pattern began. The immediate, frantic search by the group. The call to the authorities. The launch of a massive search and rescue operation. Hundreds of volunteers, multiple dog teams, and helicopters scoured the area. The trail was near a fast-flowing river, so dive teams searched the water, fearing the worst. They found nothing. And once again, the search dogs, a recurring and critical theme, reportedly behaved strangely. They could follow a scent for a short distance up the trail, but then it would just stop cold, as if Jared had been plucked into the air. For 3.5 long, agonizing years, there was no sign of him. His father, Alan Atadero, refused to give up, becoming a tireless advocate for his son, organizing his own searches and keeping Jared's story in the public eye. Then, in June of 2003, 2 hikers were exploring a remote, rugged area far from the main trail. They were about 500 feet above the trail, in a place that required technical climbing skills and scrambling over large, treacherous boulders to reach. There, in a rocky outcrop, they found the objects of a nightmare. A child's fleece pullover, a pair of pants, and a single child's hiking boot. DNA testing confirmed the clothing belonged to Jared Atadero. A few days later, searchers swarming the same area found a fragment of a child's skull and a tooth. The location of this discovery was staggering. Jared, a 3-year-old boy, had been found 550 vertical feet above the trail where he went missing, in treacherous terrain that would challenge an experienced adult climber. Experienced SAR members who were on the scene stated there was simply no way a toddler could have made that climb. It was a physical impossibility. To make matters worse, the area had also, supposedly, been searched years before, though not as thoroughly due to the extreme difficulty of the terrain. The condition of the clothing also raised disturbing questions. His pants and pullover were found turned inside out. This could, in theory, be explained by the phenomenon of paradoxical undressing, where victims of severe hypothermia become disoriented and feel intensely hot, causing them to remove their clothes. But that doesn't explain the climb. Why would a freezing, disoriented child climb up a sheer cliff face against every natural instinct? It defies all logic. A lost person, especially a child, will almost always follow the path of least resistance, which is downhill towards water. Jared's case is a quintessential example of the impossible location profile point. It forces us to confront a terrible paradox. The evidence of where he was found is undeniable, but the physics of how he got there are impossible. It's a recurring pattern. Children, the elderly, even experienced adults, found in places they could not have possibly reached on their own, often without the shoes that would have been essential for such a journey. This detail, the missing shoes, is one of the strangest and most persistent markers in the 411 profile. It's a detail that pops up again and again in case after case, a calling card of this bizarre phenomenon. And it's a central feature in our next case, which takes place in one of the biggest cluster points for these disappearances, Yosemite National Park. This is the story of Michael Pfiester. In June of 2005, Michael Pfiester, a 51-year-old man from California, decided to spend a day hiking in Yosemite. He was an adult, he was in good health, and he was a regular visitor to the park. He was last seen by a park employee asking for directions to the trail leading to the base of the iconic Horsedale Fall. It was a popular, well-traveled area. When he didn't return, his car was found in the parking lot, and a search was initiated. For 6 days, search and rescue teams scoured the area around the trail. They found nothing. Then, on the 6th day, his body was found. The location was once again baffling. He was discovered at the base of a steep, rocky drainage chute, about 1.5 miles from where he was last seen, in an area that had already been searched multiple times by ground teams and helicopters. The official cause of death was listed as probable environmental exposure, but the details were strange. He was found with his wallet and keys in his pocket, but his hiking boots and his socks were missing. They were never found. Think about that for a moment. An experienced hiker is in the rugged, granite-filled terrain of Yosemite. The one thing you would never, ever take off is your boots. They are your most essential piece of survival gear. Why would he remove them? And where did they go? The area around his body was searched meticulously, but the boots and socks had simply vanished. Furthermore, he was found near a creek, in a boulder field, 2 of the key geographical markers that Paulides identifies. The case of Michael Pfiester, an adult, reinforces the pattern. Found in an area already searched, missing his shoes, near water and boulders. It's a quiet case, one that didn't make national headlines, but it is a perfect, chilling example of the 411 profile repeating itself. The strangeness is not limited to disappearances that end in tragedy. Some of the most compelling and frankly terrifying evidence comes from the survivors. These are the people who went into the void and somehow came back, often with fragmented memories and stories that sound like something from a science fiction film. This is the story of Hedges. In September of 2014, 38-year-old Hedges went on an elk hunting trip with 2 friends in the crazy mountains of Montana. The name of the mountain range is, in this case, eerily appropriate. Hedges was not a novice. He was an experienced hunter, a skilled outdoorsman, comfortable and capable in the wilderness. He was well equipped. He had a rifle, a GPS unit, food, water, and top-of-the-line survival gear. Aaron and his friend were tracking an elk when they became separated. It was a common enough occurrence for hunters in that kind of terrain. But then, a severe, unexpected snowstorm blew in, a whiteout blizzard that dropped visibility to near zero. When Aaron didn't return to the rendezvous point, his friend called for help. The search was immediately hampered by the blizzard conditions. For several days, there was no sign of him. Given the severity of the storm, searchers feared the worst. Then, for days after he disappeared, a rancher spotted him, stumbling out of the wilderness miles from where he had gone missing. He was alive, but barely. He was suffering from severe hypothermia and frostbite, and he was wearing only a light shirt and pants. His heavy-duty hiking boots, his insulated jacket, his rifle, and all of his expensive survival gear were gone. When he was coherent enough to talk, his story was deeply, profoundly strange. He had no memory of the first 2 days he was missing. Complete blank. This missing time phenomenon is a common thread in many survivor accounts. His first memories were of finding himself on a high, rocky ridge, far from where he'd been hunting, with absolutely no idea how he got there. He said he felt like he was being pursued, not by an animal, but by people he couldn't see clearly, who were dressed in black. He felt they were hunting him. He described a bizarre, disoriented journey where he felt compelled to keep moving, to keep climbing higher and higher into the mountains, into the teeth of the blizzard. He said that his GPS and his compass had both stopped working completely. He tried to start a fire for warmth, but his lighter wouldn't work, and his waterproof matches wouldn't light. He described a feeling of being manipulated, of not being in control of his own actions, as if he were a puppet. He had a vague, dreamlike memory of taking his boots off because they felt too heavy, and of leaving his rifle behind. He had traveled over 13 miles through a blizzard, over a mountain pass, wearing almost nothing, and somehow miraculously survived. Aaron's story is terrifying because it provides a first-person perspective on the disorientation and high strangeness that seems to define these events. It hits so many of the profile points: the sudden, violent weather event, the inexplicable failure of technology and equipment, the paradoxical undressing and abandonment of essential gear, the missing time, being found in an impossible location, and the chilling feeling of being pursued by an unknown, intelligent force. He was an experienced outdoorsman, not someone prone to panic. Yet something happened to him in those mountains that stripped him of his gear, his memory, and his very sense of reality. We have looked at a fraction of the cases that fit the missing 411 profile. The child who vanishes in an instant, the victim found in an impossible location, the failure of the search dogs, the sudden, violent weather, the strange condition of clothing, the proximity to water and berry bushes, the high strangeness reported by survivors. Individually, any one of these elements could be dismissed. But when you see them repeated, case after case, decade after decade, in clusters all over the continent, it becomes difficult to ignore. It paints a picture of something deeply, fundamentally wrong. So what could possibly be causing this? What are the theories that attempt to explain these impossible disappearances? The first and most mainstream explanation is what we can call the mundane theory, or the official stance. This is the position generally held by the National Park Service and many skeptical investigators. They argue that David Paulides is a masterful storyteller, but that he is engaging in confirmation bias and pattern seeking where no real pattern exists. The argument is that he is cherry-picking cases with strange elements, ignoring the thousands of normal disappearances that have clear explanations, and weaving a narrative of mystery where there is only a collection of unrelated tragedies. In this view, each of the profile points has a rational, if grim, explanation. The weather changes fast in the mountains. That's just a meteorological fact of life, and unprepared people get caught. People who get lost and panicked do irrational things. Hypothermia, for example, is a powerful and confusing killer. It can cause paradoxical undressing, as we've discussed. It can also cause a behavior known as terminal burrowing, where a person, in their final moments, will instinctively try to burrow into a small, enclosed space, which could explain why some victims are found in dense thickets or under logs. As for the impossible locations, the mundane theory posits that we simply underestimate what a panicked or hypothermic human is capable of. Adrenaline is a powerful drug. And as for the animals, predators like mountain lions or bears can and do attack people. A large predator is certainly capable of carrying a small child to a remote location. This could be the explanation for Jared Atadero. Search dogs are not infallible. Their ability to track a scent can be severely affected by wind, rain, and the passage of time. The mundane theory argues there is nothing paranormal here, just a series of unfortunate, tragic, but ultimately explainable events that seem mysterious when stripped of their full context. This theory certainly has merit, and it likely explains a great number of cases that might initially seem strange. but it struggles with the sheer extremity and consistency of the high strangeness cases. Can a mountain lion carry a 3-year-old up a 550-foot sheer cliff face without leaving a single drop of blood or a shred of torn clothing? Can it explain why hundreds of different dog teams, from different agencies, over decades of cases, all seem to fail in the exact same way, at the exact point of last seen? Can it explain a survivor's story like Aaron Hedges's, with its themes of missing time, total equipment failure, and being hunted by a non-animal intelligence? The mundane theory, while rational, feels insufficient. It stretches the bounds of coincidence to the breaking point. This leads us to our second major theory, one that Paulides himself often hints at but never explicitly states: the cryptid or Bigfoot hypothesis. This theory proposes that the agent behind these disappearances is an unknown, unclassified primate species, what we would commonly call Bigfoot or Sasquatch. This theory is compelling because it can, on the surface, explain many of the profile points. An intelligent, powerful, bipedal creature would be strong enough to carry a person away. It would be perfectly adapted to the wilderness, able to move silently and quickly through the most rugged terrain. It would be smart enough to avoid search parties and perhaps use waterways to cover its scent trail, which would explain the consistent failure of the dogs. It would explain the bear man sighting in the Dennis Martin case. It would explain the feeling of being hunted. The theory suggests that most encounters are accidental, and that the creature, perhaps out of curiosity or fear, grabs a person, particularly a small, non-threatening child. It may not even intend to harm them, but the person dies of exposure or fright, and the creature abandons the body in a remote location. The biggest problem with this theory, of course, is the profound and undeniable lack of physical evidence for the creature's existence. Despite decades of alleged sightings, footprints, and thermal imaging, we have no body, no bones, no definitive DNA proof that such a creature exists. To accept this theory, you must first accept the existence of a creature that science does not recognize. For many, this is a leap of faith too far. It's an extraordinary claim, and it requires extraordinary evidence, which, so far, is missing. Our third and final category of theories takes us into the realm of the truly paranormal, what some call the high strangeness explanation. This is not a single theory, but a collection of ideas that propose the cause is something not of our world, or at least not of our common understanding of reality. One version of this is the classic UFO/alien abduction hypothesis. This suggests that extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings are responsible for these disappearances, using the remote wilderness as a convenient and unobserved location for abducting humans for unknown purposes: study, experimentation, or something else entirely. This could explain the feeling of being plucked from the air, the missing time, the equipment malfunctions, and the strange, fragmented memories of survivors. Another related theory is the interdimensional portal hypothesis. This idea suggests that these cluster areas in our national parks are not random. They are weak spots in the fabric of reality, places where portals to other dimensions or realities can open and close. People who disappear might be accidentally stumbling through one of these portals. This would explain their instantaneous vanishing and their reappearance in impossible locations. They weren't moved through our space, but were taken out of it and then put back in a different spot. This theory is favored by those who try to explain the connection between missing 411 cases and other paranormal phenomena like UFO sightings and cryptids, suggesting they are all visitors or phenomena slipping through the cracks from the same otherwhere. And finally, there is an even older, more folkloric idea. For millennia, cultures all over the world have had stories of the little people, or the fey elemental beings who are guardians of the wilderness and are known to be mischievous, and sometimes malevolent, towards humans. These stories often involve people, especially children, being led astray, having their memories wiped, and being stolen away into a hidden, otherworldly realm. Could the missing 411 phenomenon be a modern manifestation of this ancient, global folklore? Are we simply putting a new name on a very, very old phenomenon? These paranormal theories are compelling because they are the only ones that seem to account for all the bizarre elements of the profile. However, like the Bigfoot theory, they are based entirely on speculation and anecdotal evidence with no hard, physical proof. They ask us to believe in things far outside our everyday experience. So we are left with a mystery that is as vast and as wild as the parks themselves. We have tragic stories that defy simple answers. We have patterns that are as clear as they are inexplicable. And we have theories that range from the chillingly mundane to the utterly mind-bending. The truth, if it is ever to be found, lies somewhere in that wilderness, hidden between the trees, just off the marked trail, in the silence where the search dogs lose the scent. And that brings our investigation to a close for tonight. But the conversation must continue. This is a phenomenon that is built on data points, on shared stories, and on collective analysis. So I turn it over to you. What do you think is behind the missing 411 phenomenon? Do you believe it's a collection of explainable, albeit tragic, accidents? Do you lean towards a cryptid explanation? Or do you think the truth is something far stranger, something paranormal or interdimensional? Which theory best fits the bizarre collection of facts we've discussed? I want to hear your thoughts and your own theories in the comments below. And if you have a personal story, a strange experience you've had in the wilderness, or know of a local disappearance that fits the strange and unsettling profile, please share it. These stories are important. They are the data points that make up this immense and growing mystery. If you found this deep dive into one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries to be as compelling as I do, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support is what fuels these investigations and allows us to keep asking these difficult, and sometimes frightening, questions. And be sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the unknown. Thank you for your time. The next time you stand at a trailhead, looking out at the magnificent, silent beauty of the wilderness, take a moment. Appreciate the peace, but remember the stories, because in our national parks, not all who wander are lost. Some are taken,